You're being controlled right now. You don't feel it. That's the design. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that the greatest rulers make their subjects believe they chose their own chains. And 5 centuries later, nothing has changed except the battlefield. It moved from kingdoms to kitchens, boardrooms to bedrooms, text messages to silent treatments. There are 7 levels to this game, 7 techniques that strip you of agency so quietly you'll thank the person doing it. Most people never make it past level 3. The ones who do, the ones who reach level 7, don't just control your actions. They control the voice inside your head that decides what you're allowed to want. By the end of this, you'll know if you're the target, the weapon, or the hand that wields it. But here's the cost. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it, and that includes seeing it in yourself. You're thinking about someone right now, someone who did this to you, or someone you did this to. Don't lie, you know exactly who I'm talking about. The clock is already running. Manipulation is not chaos, it is architecture. It is blueprint. Machiavelli understood that power without structure collapses under its own weight, so he built systems, frameworks that could be taught, replicated, weaponized across generations. These 7 techniques are not random acts of cruelty. They are ascending steps. Each one builds on the last. Each one peels away another layer of your psychological defense until what's left is compliance dressed up as choice. The hierarchy matters. Level 1 is surface. Level 7 is surgery. And the reason most people fail to protect themselves is simple. They're scanning for the wrong signals. They're looking for the villain who announces himself, the abuser who screams, the manipulator who wears a name tag. But Machiavelli's true inheritors don't announce. They seduce. They reflect. They make you feel seen, safe, valued, right up until the moment you realize you've been constructing your own cage, brick by brick, with materials they handed you wrapped in care. 7 techniques, easiest to deadliest. Not in theory. Machiavelli despised theory without application, but in cold operational logic. What each technique does, why it works, what it costs the person on the receiving end. No motivation, no inspiration, just the map. Because the moment you understand the game board, you stop being a piece on it, or you become a player. That's your choice to make. Level 1, mirroring. It feels like connection. It is surveillance. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must become a great pretender and dissembler, and mirroring is the first lesson in that curriculum. The art of becoming a psychological echo. The manipulator watches, they catalog your speech patterns, your values, your fears, your humor. Then they reflect it back to you with surgical precision. You laugh, they laugh. You value loyalty, suddenly loyalty is their religion. You mention your childhood dog, next week they're telling a story about their childhood dog. It works because humans are wired for resemblance. Mirror neurons fire when we see sameness. We trust what looks like us. The manipulator knows this, so they don't waste time trying to convince you they're trustworthy. They simply become your reflection, and your brain does the rest. You think you've found your person. You think you've been understood. What you've actually found is someone running an intake interview disguised as friendship. You start editing yourself, you start performing for the mirror. Because here's the trap Machiavelli understood. Once someone mirrors you successfully, you begin to need that reflection. You start shaping your behavior to keep the mirror active. You dim the parts of yourself they didn't reflect. You amplify the parts they praised. Slowly, the authentic self gets buried beneath the version they trained you to perform. And when that happens, they don't need to control you anymore. You're controlling yourself to keep their approval. Watch for the speed of intimacy. Does this person know you too well, too fast? Do they finish your sentences after 2 conversations? Do their core values shift slightly depending on who they're talking to? Machiavelli warned that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. They believe what they see, not what is. Mirroring exploits that. You've done this before. Maybe not strategically, maybe not consciously, but you've mirrored someone to make them like you, to close a deal, to get a second date, to fit in. You shaped yourself into their reflection because you wanted something. The only difference between you and the master manipulator is intent and consistency. They do it on purpose, every time, with everyone. The question is, now that you see it, will you sharpen it or dismantle it? Level 2. Love bombing. It is acceleration. It is intensity on purpose. It is the flood before the drought. Machiavelli knew that the fastest way to conquer a city was to make its people believe they needed you more than they needed their own walls. And love bombing applies that logic to the human heart. It overwhelms your defenses with affection, so extreme, so constant, so totalizing that you don't have time to ask if it's real. Texts every hour, gifts without occasion, declarations of soulmate status within weeks. Future planning on the second date. Compliments so specific they feel like prophecy. It works because it satisfies a hunger most people don't admit they have. The hunger to be chosen, the hunger to be exceptional to someone. And the manipulator knows that hunger is a doorway. So they don't drip feed validation, they fire hose it. They don't wait for you to earn love. They drown you in it before you can think. The goal is simple. Create dependency faster than you can build perspective. Make the high so high that the inevitable low feels like withdrawal. Dopamine spikes during intense romantic attention. The brain starts associating that person with reward. When the love bombing stops, and it always stops, you don't feel neutral. You feel abandoned. You feel broken. You start chasing the high they conditioned you to crave. That's the Machiavellian elegance of it. They don't need to keep bombing forever. They just need to bomb long enough that you become the one trying to earn it back. You start wondering what you did wrong. You start performing to restore the flood. Because love bombing isn't actually about love. It's about leverage. It creates an emotional baseline so artificially elevated that normal, healthy affection feels like neglect by comparison. So when they pull back, you panic. You concede. You ignore red flags because you're too busy trying to solve the puzzle. What changed? How do I get them back? Measure the timeline against the intimacy. Are they saying I love you before they know your middle name? Are they planning your future before they have met your friends? Are they isolating you from others under the disguise of us against the world? Machiavelli wrote that the promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. Love bombing is the promise. The pullback is the broken word. And by the time you realize it, you're already hooked on a drug they control the supply of. You've felt this, on the receiving end or the giving end. You've been the one who came on strong because you wanted someone locked in before they had time to think. Or you've been the one drowning in someone else's intensity, mistaking obsession for devotion. Either way, you know this pattern. The question is whether you'll use it or refuse it. Level 3, guilt tripping. It is weaponized conscience. It turns your morality into their remote control. It makes you the villain in a story they wrote. Machiavelli understood that the most effective chains are the ones people forge themselves, and guilt tripping is the hammer. It takes your natural desire to be good, fair, considerate, and twists it into a mechanism of compliance. The manipulator doesn't ask directly. They sigh, they imply, they martyr. I guess I'll just handle it myself. After everything I've done for you, I thought you cared about me. It works because guilt is a social emotion. It evolved to correct genuine wrongdoing. But the manipulator hijacks that system. They manufacture debts you never agreed to. They reframe reasonable boundaries as betrayals. They perform suffering so theatrically that your refusal to comply feels like cruelty. And here's the Machiavellian precision. They never tell you what to do. They make you feel so morally compromised that you volunteer the solution they wanted all along. Guilt reduces resistance. It bypasses logic and activates shame. When someone guilt trips you, they're not appealing to your reasoning. They're appealing to your fear of being a bad person. And that fear is older, louder, faster than conscious thought. So you comply. You apologize. You sacrifice your needs to restore the moral equilibrium they disturbed. Except the equilibrium was never real. It was theater. And the ticket price is your agency. You start preemptively apologizing for things you didn't do. You start shrinking your requests to avoid their disappointment, because guilt tripping trains you to see your needs as burdens. It conditions you to believe that wanting anything for yourself is inherently selfish. So you stop wanting, you stop asking. You become smaller and smaller until you fit neatly into the role they assigned you. The one who gives, sacrifices, and never complains. Listen for the weaponization of care. Do they keep a mental ledger of everything they've done for you? Do they frame your boundaries as emotional abandonment? Do they perform hurt instead of communicating needs? Machiavelli warned that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner affects his ruin than his preservation. Guilt tripping inverts that. It makes you neglect what ought to be done in favor of what they claim was already done. You've guilt-tripped someone. You've sighed just loud enough for them to hear. You've said, "Fine, I'll do it myself," when what you meant was, "You owe me and you know it." You've kept score. You've performed disappointment to get what logic couldn't. The manipulator just does it systematically, consciously, without remorse. The tools are the same, the intent is different, or is it? Level 4. Silent treatment. It is exile. It is emotional amputation. It is the weaponization of absence. Machiavelli wrote that men ought either to be well-treated or crushed because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries. Of more serious ones, they cannot. And the silent treatment applies this to relationships. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It simply removes you from the field of their attention. And in that removal, you feel the full weight of your own powerlessness. No communication, no acknowledgement, no access, just void. It works because humans are social animals. Ostracism activates the same brain regions as physical pain. The silent treatment doesn't hurt metaphorically, it hurts literally. And the manipulator knows this, so they don't need to yell, threaten, or justify. They just stop. Stop responding. Stop looking. Stop existing in your direction. And in that silence, you unravel. You replay every interaction. You catastrophize. You apologize for offenses you can't even name because the not knowing is worse than the punishment. Silent treatment causes anxiety, depression, and decreased self-worth. It is a form of control so effective that prisons use it as torture. Why? Because the silent manipulator forces you to do all the work. You write the narrative of what you did wrong. You beg for restoration. You make concessions just to end the silence. Machiavelli knew that the most efficient power is the kind that makes the subject discipline themselves, and silent treatment perfects that. It turns your need for connection into a self-interrogation chamber. You start to distrust your own perceptions. You start to believe you deserve the silence. Because here's the trap. The silent treatment is always framed as your fault. They're not ignoring you. You made them withdraw. They're not punishing you. You hurt them so badly they can't speak. The blame shifts. The responsibility shifts. And suddenly you're the one apologizing for their cruelty, which is exactly the inversion Machiavelli taught. Make the victim grateful when the punishment ends. Measure the pattern, not the incident. Does silence follow every boundary you set? Do they withhold communication until you comply with unspoken demands? Do they return only after you've sufficiently debased yourself? Machiavelli said it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But the silent manipulator wants both. They want you to fear the absence of their love so much that you'll do anything to restore it. You've used silence as a weapon. You've withdrawn when words felt too risky. You've withheld your presence to punish someone without confrontation. You've made them come to you. You've waited for them to break first. The manipulator just refined what you stumbled into by accident. They know silence is more powerful than rage because rage gives you something to fight. Silence gives you nothing but your own thoughts eating you alive. Stop. You need to understand something. You can't unknow this. Right now, you're thinking about someone who did this to you, or someone you've done this to. And once you finish this video, you'll see it everywhere. In your parents, in your partner, in yourself. This isn't information. This is contamination. If you keep watching, you're choosing to see the world as it is, not as you wish it were. Most people stop here. The ones who don't, they're the ones who either break free or become what they're studying. Are you the strategist, the shield, or the subject? You're one of the three. The only question is whether you're choosing it or defaulting into it. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince for the conquered. He wrote it for the ones willing to hold the knife. Which one are you? Level 5. Gaslighting. It is reality theft. It is the murder of your memory. It is the colonization of your mind. Machiavelli wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are, and gaslighting weaponizes that gap. It makes you doubt what you experienced, what you saw, what you felt, until the only reality that exists is the one they narrate. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things over and over until the ground beneath your perception cracks. It works because memory is fragile. It is reconstructive, not photographic. When someone confidently denies your reality, your brain starts second-guessing. And the manipulator knows this. So they don't gaslight once. They gaslight systemically. They deny. They minimize. They rewrite. They accuse you of the very manipulation they're performing. And because they do it with such conviction, such calm, such certainty, you start to wonder, am I crazy? Am I the problem? Did I make this up? That question is the victory. The moment you doubt yourself more than you doubt them, they've won. You're standing in the kitchen. You remember the words. You know what was said, the tone, the exact phrasing, and they're looking at you like you invented it, like you're insane, like the conversation you're referencing never happened. And for a second, just a second, you wonder if you are. That second is all they need. Gaslighting erodes self-trust. It creates cognitive dissonance so severe that victims abandon their own perceptions just to resolve the tension. Machiavelli understood that controlling the narrative is more powerful than controlling the territory. And gaslighting is narrative control at its most intimate. It doesn't just tell you what happened. It tells you that you can't be trusted to know what happened. It replaces your inner witness with theirs. You stop trusting your own mind. You stop believing your own eyes. Because gaslighting doesn't just distort one memory. It contaminates the entire system. If they can convince you that you misremembered one fight, one promise, one event, then everything becomes suspect. Your anger, your hurt, your boundaries, all of it gets filtered through the question, am I overreacting? Am I making this up? And when that becomes your default question, you've lost the ability to protect yourself. Document, don't debate. Do they deny things you have written proof of? Do they accuse you of being too emotional when you present facts? Do they flip the script so you end up apologizing for confronting them? Machiavelli said the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him, and the gaslighter's intelligence is measured by how thoroughly they've convinced you that you are the unreliable narrator. You've denied someone's reality, maybe not maliciously, maybe you genuinely remembered it differently, but you've said that's not what happened when you meant that's not what I want to have happened. You've minimized their feelings because acknowledging them felt too costly. You've reframed their reasonable reaction as overreaction because it was easier than accountability. The gaslighter just does it strategically, without hesitation, without guilt. They know memory is malleable. They know confidence beats evidence. They know that if they rewrite it enough times, you'll start citing their version as your own. Level 6, Triangulation. It is engineered insecurity. It is the introduction of ghosts. It is competition you can't win because the opponent isn't real or isn't relevant, but the anxiety is. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler should never allow a rival to grow strong enough to threaten him, but should also never eliminate all rivals, because men are always uncertain until they have been made secure by a certain degree of force, and triangulation applies this to relationships. It keeps you perpetually uncertain, perpetually competing, perpetually trying to prove you're enough by comparing you to a phantom. The manipulator brings in a third party, an ex who's still in their life, a coworker who just gets them, a friend who they're so close to, you wouldn't understand. The goal is not to replace you, it's to destabilize you, to make you feel like you're auditioning for a role that's always on the verge of being recast. The third party doesn't even need to be a threat. They just need to exist in the manipulator's narrative as someone who provides what you apparently don't. It works because humans have a tribal fear of being ousted. Jealousy, envy, and comparison are evolutionary alarms. When the manipulator triangulates, They're setting off that alarm intentionally, and your response is predictable. You try harder. You compete. You prove your worth. You monitor their interactions with the third party. You shrink yourself to fit the mold they've implied the other person already fills. Machiavelli knew that divided enemies are easier to control than united ones, and triangulation divides you. Your rational self knows this is manipulation, but your emotional self is sprinting to win a race that has no finish line. Triangulation creates what psychologists call intrasexual competition anxiety. It hijacks mate retention behaviors and turns them into control mechanisms. The person being triangulated becomes hypervigilant, hyper-accommodating, hyper-focused on the manipulator's needs. They police their own jealousy. They perform gratitude for scraps of attention. They become smaller, quieter, more compliant, all to avoid being replaced by the ghost the manipulator summoned. You are always lacking, always being measured, because triangulation doesn't just make you compete with someone else. It makes you compete with yourself, the version of you they praised last week, the version of you they compared to the third party, the version of you that existed before they introduced doubt. And no matter what you do, you're chasing a standard that shifts every time you think you've reached it. Watch for the strategic deployment of others. Do they constantly mention how close they are to someone else right after you've expressed a need? Do they compare you unfavorably to an ex, coworker, or friend, casually like it's an observation, not a weapon? Do they refuse to establish boundaries with third parties even when it's clearly damaging your relationship? Machiavelli said divide and rule is the cardinal law of power, and triangulation is that law applied to intimacy. It divides your attention, your confidence, your sense of security, so the manipulator can rule unchallenged. You've triangulated someone. You've mentioned an ex just a little too fondly when your current partner was getting comfortable. You've name-dropped a coworker who admires your work right when your boss was taking you for granted. You've made someone feel replaceable because you wanted them to fight harder for you. You've used the ghost of competition to extract effort you didn't want to ask for directly. The manipulator just weaponizes what you stumbled into by insecurity. Level 7, emotional blackmail. It is the end game. It is total internal control. It is the point where the manipulator no longer needs to act because you've internalized their voice, their rules, their threats, and now you police yourself. Machiavelli wrote that the best fortress is to be found in the love of the people, but emotional blackmail inverts this. It builds a fortress inside you, and the walls are fear, obligation, and guilt. Fog. Fear of consequences, obligation to comply, guilt for considering anything else. The manipulator doesn't need to threaten you constantly. They've already conditioned you to imagine the worst-case scenario every time you think about resisting. This is what makes it deadliest. Not because it's loud, not because it's violent, but because it becomes self-sustaining. The manipulator plants the bomb once. If you leave, I'll hurt myself. If you tell anyone, I'll destroy you. If you don't do this, I'll take the kids. After all I've sacrificed, you owe me this. And then they step back. They don't need to repeat the threat. You repeat it for them. Every time you think about setting a boundary, every time you imagine saying no, every time you consider your own needs, the threat plays in your head like a loop. Emotional blackmail creates what's called learned helplessness. The victim learns that resistance leads to unbearable consequences, so they stop resisting, even when the path to freedom is right in front of them. Machiavelli knew that the most dangerous weapon is the one the enemy doesn't see, and emotional blackmail is invisible because it lives inside you. It is the whisper that says you can't leave. You're responsible for their pain. If you speak up, everything will fall apart. It is the manipulator's voice, but you've mistaken it for your own conscience. You stop knowing what you want. You stop believing you have the right to want anything. Because emotional blackmail doesn't just control your behavior. It controls your desires. It makes wanting something for yourself feel like a moral failure. It makes protecting yourself feel like an act of cruelty. You become a servant to someone else's emotions, someone else's stability, someone else's life. And the cruelest part? You believe it's love. You believe it's duty. You believe it's what good people do. Listen for the unspoken threat. Do you avoid certain topics because you already know the consequences? Do you feel like you're responsible for their emotional stability? Do you stay not because you want to, but because you're terrified of what will happen if you don't? Machiavelli wrote, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles, and emotional blackmail strips you of the title of autonomous human. It makes you a role, a function, a tool in someone else's survival." Emotional blackmail is where you surrender, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, internally, completely. You stop fighting because you've forgotten you're allowed to. You've emotionally blackmailed someone. You've said, if you love me, you'd do this. You've threatened to withdraw, not your presence, but your stability, if they didn't comply. You've made your pain their responsibility. You've weaponized your vulnerability to extract what negotiation couldn't. Maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe you were desperate. Maybe you learned it from someone who did it to you. The manipulator just perfected it. They know that the most effective control is the kind the victim administers themselves. Here's what Machiavelli never said but understood completely. The goal of power is not to be seen wielding it. The goal is to make the subject believe they chose submission. That's the difference between force and manipulation. Force is visible. Force creates resistance. Force leaves evidence. But manipulation? Manipulation makes you the architect of your own captivity. It makes you defend the person harming you. It makes you gaslight yourself so they don't have to. Every technique in this hierarchy operates on the same principle. Outsource the violence. Make the victim do the work of their own subjugation. Mirroring makes you edit yourself. Love bombing makes you chase the high. Guilt tripping makes you shrink your needs. Silent treatment makes you beg for restoration. Gaslighting makes you doubt reality. Triangulation makes you compete with phantoms. Emotional blackmail makes you imprison yourself. The manipulator's hands stay clean. You built the cage. You locked the door. You swallowed the key. And the reason most people never escape is simple. They're looking for the enemy outside when the enemy has already been installed inside. The manipulator's greatest trick is making you believe your compliance is virtue. Your silence is patience. Your self-abandonment is love. Machiavelli wrote that men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. The question is not whether manipulation exists. The question is, are you the someone? And if you are, what are you going to do about it? You now have power, not over others yet, but over yourself, over your attention, your reality, your willingness to see what's actually happening instead of what you wish were happening. Most people who watch this will do nothing. They'll recognize someone in their life, a partner, a boss, a parent. They'll nod. They'll feel validated. Then they'll close the video and go right back to the same dynamic, because recognition without action is just spectating your own life. But some of you, the ones still here, you're different. You didn't come here for validation. You came here for ammunition. You came here because you're tired of being the person things happen to. You're ready to be the person who sees it coming, the one who doesn't flinch when the mirror cracks, the one who doesn't beg when the silence starts, the one who doesn't apologize for reality just because someone else denies it. Machiavelli didn't write for the masses. He wrote for the ones who were willing to see power as it is, not as they wish it were. If you're one of them, the next video breaks down how to dismantle emotional blackmail from the inside. Not theory, operational steps. How to extract yourself without becoming what you're escaping. If you're not ready for that, no judgment. But you can't unknow what you just learned. You're awake now. The only question is what you're going to do about it. Subscribe if you're ready to stop being played. Don't if you're not. Either way, you're not the same person you were 37 minutes ago, and you never will be again. Welcome to the ones who see. You're not alone, you're just awake. And once you're awake, you don't go back to sleep. You don't unsee the patterns. You don't pretend love is blind when you know exactly how vision works.